such notice in the Home News Tribune, the Asbury Park Press, the board office, the schools, and Cablevision Channel 118, and Verizon Fios Channel 24, and by filing such notice with the township clerk. This meeting was scheduled for May 6, 2025. The Board of Education will present the budget to the public and accept comments on the 2025 to 2026 school year budget. Mr. Waddell?
The Old Bridge Township Public Board of Education acknowledges that the law of this state establishes that members of the public, including members of the board, have the right to record public board meetings using audio or video recording devices, provided that the act of recording does not interfere with the business of this public board meeting. Therefore, the board makes it known that any such recording is to be considered the private recording of the individual and in no manner represents the official record of this board. The board therefore takes no responsibility for such private recording and completely disavows any future use.
Roll call, please.
Dunn.
Here.
Francisco. Giordano. Audrey.
Here.
Mazzone.
Here.
Slade.
Here.
Solikowski.
Here.
Venkatason.
Here.
Dantuno.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Can everyone please stand for the pledge?
Oh my God, Joe Mayor's on there.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
For the record on the attendance, we're going to put my name instead of Joe Mara's name. Sorry,
bringing Joe
Joanne,
back.
for calling you out there on the public meeting, but okay.
So can I just preference it? So I just want to let the public know there's going to be a lot of information, and kind of just like last month, listen to it all, process it all before you have your full reactions, because it's going to be in-depth and a lot, but it all comes together at the end.
Thank you, Ms. Dantuno. Okay. Good evening. I want to welcome all in attendance and watching remotely to the public hearing presenting our 25-26 proposed budget for the Old Bridge Township School District. Tonight's presentation will look a little different than in years past, with a revamped version of our presentation. As a team, although the idea of celebrating achievements and our accomplishments while persevering through budget cuts in previous years is important and something to speak of and be proud of, we found it important this year to get to the nitty-gritty, so to speak, of the presentation. To dive into the numbers and present our realities. Too loud?
Yeah, that's too much. I was going to say the same thing.
I'm excited. Yep.
There you go.
And present the realities of our budget to the community. Tonight's presentation will be split into two parts. The first half will provide information on the tentative budget that was submitted. The budget submitted to the and approved by the county for legal advertisement. The second half of the budget presentation will be the possibilities of what could be with the introduction of the tax levy incentive aid program that has been discussed and mentioned by the state of New Jersey. Now, as a disclaimer and a note to all, while we have submitted our application to the state for review on the tax levy incentive aid program, we have not had an official answer on the application yet. In fact, the latest email came from the state on Thursday, May 1st, and the subject of that email was TLIA letters, delayed, meaning approval letters have been delayed at this time. What the state was trying to do is get all approval letters prior to any district's budget hearings, because many districts adopt the budget the same day as your public hearing. Something we thought best to change last year would be to present and have a formal adoption of our budget a week later in case any changes needed to be made, and in the case of last year, new laws being passed on the day we were supposed to or planning to adopt our budget. And so here we go. We have tonight's budget. Well, here we go. The 25-26 annual school budget will be voted on for adoption at the Board of Education agenda session scheduled for next week, Tuesday, May 13th, by the following 9 board members: Jennifer Dantuno, Board President; Elena Francisco, Vice President; Richard Dunn; Salvatore Giordano; Marjorie Jodry; Christina Mazzone; Jay Slade; Matthew Solikowski; and Kieran Venkatason. As long as they're in attendance, all 9 board members have a voting right next week. The 25-26 annual school budget presentation will be provided this evening by the following members of the Old Bridge Township Board of Education Leadership Council: David Cittadino, Superintendent of Schools, David Wydell, School Business Administrator, Dr. Kathleen Hoker, Assistant Superintendent of Schools, and Dr. James Toohey, Assistant Superintendent of Educational Programs. I will add, it's really going to be a lot of me today. We do have opening remarks, however, courtesy of David Cittadino, our Superintendent of Schools. So I'll turn it over to Dave to make an opening remark, and he'll turn it back to me.
Thank you, Mr. Wydell. So last year, when we entered in the budget process, I told the public that it was a really bad year to be a board member. There's always good reasons and bad reasons to be a board member, but last year I knew going into it that it was going to be a very difficult year because difficult decisions would have to be made in reference to the state aid and school budgets. And I'm well connected to a lot of superintendents around the state, and we could see that the writing on the wall that there was an unprecedented time in which schools, many of them would be reaching their financial cliff. And knowing that the 2% budget levy cap wasn't going to meet the needs of school districts to operate under a thorough and efficient model was going to have to be something they adjusted. What I didn't know is that the state would wait to the last minute to come out with legislation to address that shortfall. This year, it's even worse time to be a board member, so welcome to our new board members. And you picked a terrible year to be a board member because difficult decisions are going to have to be made, and those are being felt across the state of New Jersey. Superintendents like myself have been talking about this fiscal cliff that is happening, and there has been no real remedies across state legislation and the Department of Education to fix this, because as we see across our households and across everywhere in the country, prices are increasing, not just in healthcare, and increases in the minimum wage. And you say, well, how does that impact schools? When the minimum wage goes up, so do the salaries of our employees go up. And that starts a ripple effect. And when the price of groceries go up in your house, they too go up in our schools. All of our materials and supplies and things we use to take care of our students and provide that thorough and efficient education as well. Transportation costs go up. Transportation costs and fuel costs and energy costs go up here as well. But the one thing that we don't have that the public has is the ability to generate more income. You know, sometimes when things are difficult, you can go out and generate more income, whether it be picking up another shift or working other hours. School districts are limited to a 2% cap on their income. There are certain criteria in which they can go above that 2% for adjustments, but general costs going up is not one of those opportunities. You can also pinch and cut back on things. Well, we've done that, and I went over that at the last meeting, that we've done those cuts since 2017, when the state came to us after approving our budget and cut $600,000 from our budget. And they said, we know you've already started spending, but make do with what you have, because next year is going to be even worse. With that, we made some very difficult decisions. The board made difficult decisions that year, and we had to close a school. And in that same year, we reduced 84 positions. We've been reducing positions all along since 2018, and we've even sold the property. All to get to this point where we're at now, and in the last minute, even as our business administrator, Mr. Wydell, has identified, that the state still doesn't know what they're doing. They put a hold on all applications. They came out with this tax incentive aid plan that we can get up to $1 million back if we go up to our adequacy level, which is we're under $30 million under adequacy based upon their formula that is indicative of three things: your property values, your income, and how many on the third one? And the enrollment. So the enrollment, we saw a decline in enrollment, but now we see our enrollment going up. That's one area where we can actually plan for and fiscally be ready for. But your property value of the homes in Old Bridge and your income, it doesn't matter to us. They're saying they've gone up so much and the property value has gone up that we have to generate more revenue from the taxpayers. But that 2% still exists. You have to generate more revenue, but 2% is your cap. So it doesn't matter to us, and I made joke of this last week, that if everybody in this room hit the Mega Millions and you all won $800 million, tax-wise, you'd say, well, the general population of Old Bridge had a significant increase in their income. They can be taxed more. We could only tax you at 2%. So it creates that we need to get more, but we can't get it type of formula. So last year, they said, well, we'll let you go up to 9.9% because we understand that you can't provide that thorough and efficient education. And when I'm talking about thorough and efficient education, I'm not talking about just providing math, English, social studies, and science. A thorough and efficient education in 2025 meets all the needs of the students, and regardless of their abilities or disabilities. We have to meet the needs of every student and meet them where they're at. That's what a thorough and efficient education is. Not every student wants to go to college, so you have to meet the needs of the students that want to go into the careers. We have to meet the students who need to learn to be independent, so when they leave school that they can take care of themselves. We need to meet the careers, meet the needs of the students who even want to go to the military. That's why I have a great program like ROTC. We have to meet the needs of our students. So that was offered as a one-time allowance that we can go up to 9.9%. They didn't say that's never going to be a problem again. They said this is a one-time opportunity for you to do that. So this year, even after the budget, the state aid came out, and we had to start adopting a budget, the last minute they came out with the state aid incentive plan. And Mr. Wydell, our team, we scrambled, put together tentative budgets to present to the board. The board has worked hard and diligently, many hours coming together to have a unified response to this. And our answer from the state is, well, hold on, we're not looking at it right now. And we hope to get back to you before you have to adopt it by the 14th. So that's where we're at right now. That's the insanity of trying to operate a school district, and the state is building a plane as they're flying it. That's the only analogy I can give you. And that is where we're at. So you're going to hear a lot of information tonight about what things could be and where things need to be. And I want to thank our administration, our educators that have been working with us in this, the families that pay attention, and because it all comes down to our students, and most of all our board members who are going to be making some very difficult decisions over the next 2 weeks. Thank you very much, and I hand it back to you, Mr. Wydell.
Thank you, Mr. Cedeno. So we're going to kick off this year's presentation with our review of our budget priorities. This is a slide that you'll typically see on every budget presentation across the state. But for 25-26, our priorities really have not changed much. We still operate on the continued approach that our top priority is for our students to learn in safe, secure, and healthy environments. Just beyond that is and always has been our goal to meet the educational, social, emotional, and physical needs of all students. With this 25-26 budget, between the culminating impact of S2, the funding formula, the use of reserves to balance prior budgets, and the increase of expenditures greatly outpacing obtainable revenues, it would be an extremely difficult task of meeting those priorities. Learning in safe, secure, and healthy environments and meeting the needs of all students is our baseline of a thorough and efficient education. And with all the factors mentioned, for 25-26, the district again saw itself at the crossroads of having to submit a tentative budget with unrealistic expectations and an unacceptable baseline for thorough and efficient. So, like many other districts leading up to our tentative budget submission, we implored the state to intervene and assist in providing a mechanism for additional funding that would allow us to be able to provide a thorough and efficient education for all students the way we see it and the way that this entire community deserves. With the submission of our tentative budget, we requested a loan from the Department of Education to cover a structural deficit of $17,946,798. We highlighted that amount in our tentative budget resolution. We were transparent about that to the state and made it known to them that if there were no assistance offered, the eliminations, the cuts, the reductions, whatever you want to call them, would be devastating to our community. Draconian, if you will, has been said before. The DOE ultimately denied the request for a loan, stating that there is no loans, and they are not in the business of providing loans to districts. At that point, we had no choice but to submit a revised version of our tentative budget, including this $17,946,798 reduction in expenditures. Now, when people first heard that number, the immediate response was, how could that be? I presented to our board, I presented to administration, I presented to different stakeholders, and again, it's kind of an eye-boggling number. Well, when budgeting, the guiding principle is revenues drive expenditures. There is no credit card here that the district can use to buy on credit. If I can provide an example, if we have $180 million in expenditures and my anticipated revenues are $170 million, I cannot just inflate the revenues to match the $180 million in expenditures, because when you encounter all the nuances that take place in a school year and you actually spend that $180 million, you realize at the end of the day that $10 million of that is funny money that does not exist, and I just made the district goes bankrupt. So we have to budget in a way that the revenues allow for the expenditures. Last year in 24-25, our expenditures were $168,259,742. This year, anticipated general fund expenditures was at $179,987,693. There is nothing extraordinary in there or extravagant in there. It maintains the programs, the schools, and the employees. Essentially, how we have been operating with the anticipated increase we expect. The difference in expenditures is $11,727,951. It would be ideal if we could stop at that, but this situation is what I refer to as a double-edged sword. Our revenues in 24-25 matched our expenditures in the amount of $168,259,742. In our 25-26 tentative budget, our projected revenue is actually $162,040,895, which is down $6.2 million from prior year. So combined, the increase of expenditures and the decrease in revenues provides our structural deficit, a true double-edged sword. Okay, just to mention, if people don't want to look at the TV, there is a QR code in the back. If you have a smartphone, you can take a picture of that QR code, and it will bring up the presentation that is posted online right now. So, if you want to pass it around, just so you could. We did put this online, and we made a QR code, so it'll direct right to the presentation. So I'll give 2 minutes for anyone. I'll get a drink. Okay. So on this slide, you'll see the decrease in revenues is attributable to a couple things. One, our reserve balances from prior years are no longer available. We heard it from our audit presentation earlier this year. There is a 2% maximum that we can keep that's not expended in the year, and you send that to assigned surplus. Anything above that would have to go back to our taxpayers in future year budgets or to build reserves. In our final audit number for 23-24, our comparison of revenues to expenditures, we are below that 2% maximum. As some other items, as we know, we also had the 3% reduction in the state aid. The stabilized school budget funding, essentially the 45% of the state aid that the state gave back last year to us when we went up to 9.9, was a one-time offer last year. And we also have reductions in both federal and other state funding for 25-26. One of them being our extraordinary aid is less expected, and also for federal funding, semi-Medicaid reimbursements, much lower than they were in prior years. Meanwhile, our expenditures also continue to increase. Salaries, employee benefits, out-of-district tuition, property insurance, energy costs, and transportation costs, just to name some of the major sources. They were reviewed at the last meeting we have, so if anyone didn't watch our previous meeting presentation, the board did a great job in getting together to provide kind of a blip of where we stand with this budget. So what is in a budget with 18 million less in expenditures? Well, to be honest, it's not pretty, and our board collectively touched on it last meeting. A shortened day at the high school with eliminations or reductions on non-mandatory programs. Elimination of full-day kindergarten. Again, kindergarten is not required in the state of New Jersey. No security coverage at any of our schools. Again, a scary thought. The closing of multiple schools and no related arts programs for our elementary schools. Meaning that the day, what did I write here? We would start later. That's my chicken scratch. We would start later in the day for elementary schools because there would be no related arts programs for them. So a shortened day essentially equates to a later start in the morning. These are major reductions with major consequences. But that is the only way to cut $18 million. I mentioned it personally. I can only cut supplies and paper so many times, and it equates to nothing. When you're talking about $18 million, you have to make major eliminations. And again, it renders a district that is not the district you know and expect it to be. With our tentative general fund revenues, you will see that the major impact is the first two lines, which are all of our reserves. Then $775,000 that is in that one line is our capital reserve expenditures or in revenue for paving projects. But again, the capital reserve can only be used for capital projects. As Ms. D'Antono says in multiple meetings, it's kind of like a separate bank account. You have the sale of the Nike base. That revenue that was generated from that sale went to a capital reserve account. That reserve account can only be used for capital projects. So I mentioned at the last meeting, or one of the meetings, we anticipate or plan to do some asphalt paving projects for some of the areas that kids use for recess. It's a much needed improvement, and again, our insurance company will be happy that we're improving some of those giant potholes that some of the schools have. Other reserves, however, such as maintenance reserve, helped the district in the past with general maintenance and repairs. Collectively, without the availability of the first two lines, you can see we're in the hole $10.5 million. You make some leeway back with the third line being the tax levy, the local tax levy, which equates to 5.27. This 5.27 includes a 2% increase plus allowable adjustments for the increase of healthcare costs and projected increase of enrollment for this year. Then the remaining lines all see negative numbers again. All in all, it equates to a total revenue of $162,040,895, which is $6.2 million less than 24-25. On this slide, I have summarized the budget into 7 categories. Many of these categories would take on cuts aside from employee benefits, which we are contractually obligated to provide, as well as tuition, which we are legally obligated to pay. The next slide is the same information reproduced in a pie chart form. It just breaks down really the percentages to show that our program costs, which is essentially going to be explained on the next slide, and our employee benefits equate to about 70% of our budget. As you saw, program costs is the highest percentage of the budget, and naturally so. Program costs include everything listed on this slide: regular program instruction, special education instruction, basic skills instruction, bilingual education instruction, co-curricular and athletic instruction, alternate education and community programs, attendance, health services, support services, guidance, child study teams, improving instructional services, educational media services, and staff training services. Essentially, many of the things it takes to operate a district. The expenditures within these programs include salaries of teachers, salaries of paraprofessionals, purchase professional services, supplies, materials, and etc. When you have 18 million in cuts, these are the areas that would see the devastating impacts and have lasting ones for the future. For our capital outlay this year, it is highlighted by funds to complete asphalt paving projects in the amount of $775,000. The next slide, we discuss the slide everyone likes to see, or not see, the tax impact. For 25-26, a 5.27% increase, which is the quote-unquote mandatory 2% with allowable adjustments, would mean that for an average assessed home valued at $157,373, your annual tax increase would be $267.20. That means that $267.20 increase is with the cut of $18 million in expenditures. So for $267.20 more a year, if you're at the average assessed value, you will have a district that, again, is a mere shell of itself and what we know and expect it to be. So again, $267.20 more for a taxpayer if your home is at the average value. The $267 is essentially a budget of $18 million cut in expenditures. On the next slide, I have included different benchmarks ranging anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000, comparing what your increase from 24-25 would be. So I have different home values there, again, just estimated, and then what the total school portion of your taxes would be. I'll lower the volume again. Again, a school portion of the taxes is about 60% of the total tax bill. There's still fire districts, library, and municipality in there. Okay, so about 60% of your tax bill would equate to this increase at, again, the average assessed value of a home, $267.20, but that cuts $18 million in expenditures. Earlier I mentioned that many districts implored the state to provide a mechanism to help them cure their deficit, hence the introduction of the proposed tax levy incentive aid program. A thing to note, districts are working their tails off, and boards of educations all across the state are making extremely difficult decisions, and the reality is this program is only contingent upon the adoption of the state's annual appropriation bill, which is typically passed right around July 1st. So as Dave mentioned, in the email that we received, all reviews of the applications are on hold right now. Hopefully we get a decision by May 14th, which is when budgets are due to the state and the county for adoption. But what the underlying caveat in all this is that this entire program rests on the state's ability to pass their own budget, because part of their own budget was appropriation amount set on the side for every district that was eligible for this incentive aid. They put maybe, a couple $100 million aside to give back in their incentive aid program. The tax levy incentive aid was introduced by the DOE, allowing districts the potential to increase expenditures above the 2% tax levy cap and its allowable adjustments, up to the amount the district is deemed below adequacy in its spending. With the additional increase in expenditures, the state, through its own budget, would provide levy incentive aid in the amount of 5% of the expenditure amount increased up to $1 million. The Old Bridge Township Board of Education was provided that we are under adequacy by $30,444,449. The board adopted a resolution approving the submission of an application up to that full taxing authority amount provided above. However, on April 17th, during our spring break, the district was provided a response letter from the DOE stating that while it met all submission requirements of the application, but by April 28th, which was a Monday, the state needed to the district either needed to confirm either the total amount of the application, or submit a revised application with a lesser amount. The Board of Ed met in executive session and decided upon a revised application totaling $23 million in increased expenditures, meaning $22 million in the levy and $1 million from the state. So again, by April 28th, we needed to either confirm the total amount of our application or submit a revised application. So for the revised application, the board prioritized the inclusion of additional expenditures attributable to it. And I will say this, it's not on the slide, but I'm going to fix it for a revised slide tomorrow. First and foremost, I will adjust that before reposting on the website, in this application of 23 million, we are reinstating all the expenditures that were either cut, reduced, eliminated. Everything that amounted to that $17,946,798 in expenditures, meaning no shortened days, full day kindergarten, security coverage at all the schools, athletic programs, and so on. Additionally, after school transportation and I will emphasize this, with a modified schedule. We are looking at the potential to bring back after school transportation only for academic supports though. Academic supports, and this is pending approval by the DOE on a modified schedule. So we can't make any promises, okay? But we talked about it in length. We're gonna try to bring up some kind of discussion or a schedule for academic supports after school. It'll be a lot of coordination, but it's something that the board did include in the application. So again, $17,946,798 in expenditures. That's covered. Plus funding for new science curriculum, additional funding for Play Unified programs, additional funding for special education supports, funding for long-range strategic and capital improvement planning, just to name some other major things. Again, the application has not been approved and is under review with the Department of Education. So, now we have our general fund revenues with the proposed tax levy incentive aid. The only changes you will see here is a new line bringing in $22 million in additional revenue from the tax levy and $1 million in additional aid from the state for the bone that they would throw our way, $1 million. Compared to 24-25, that is $16.7 million more in revenue. The next page is how the additional funding shows necessary increase across all but one budget category, meeting the needs of programs, schools, staff, students, and our community. The next slide is just our pie chart related to the proposed tax levy incentive aid program submission, showing that program costs are now at 48.12% of our budget. So this is just, again, the pie chart. The next page shows the impact to our programs with the tax levy incentive aid application, and many of the dollars and percentage changes that were in the negative have now reversed to the positive. Within the tax levy incentive aid program application, our science curriculum was a huge sticking point. And with the potential addition of a new curriculum, we included potential funds to repair our planetariums at our middle schools. Now, one is at GNC and one is at the middle school. Now, if this item were approved by the DOE, again, the application is still pending, the repairs may not be an easy endeavor. This is highly specialized equipment that when you add those words to describe anything, that comes with a price tag. But coinciding potentially with a new science curriculum, we also see the repairs necessary to make 2 functioning planetariums into a revenue source for the district. We've included some forward thinking in that. So many districts have reached out to us saying, you have a planetarium. We're interested in doing a field trip, to check it out. We don't really have a working planetarium. It is huge cost to repair. $300,000 is what we estimate it to be. Again, that would be in a cut of $18 million. That would, mean $300 million more to cut if you were to actually budget for those increased expenditures. So, tying with a new science curriculum, we're looking to try to make some repairs to our current planetariums and try to bring in a revenue source for the future. Now, the slides that many people are looking for. With the 5.2% increase on the 25-26 budget, with the $22 million in additional in tax levy with the program, the annual increase for a home valued at the average assessed value of $157,373 would be a total of $728.66. So again, in comparison, the 5.27 increase, if you're at the average assessed value, was $18 million in cuts, equates to $267.20. Now, this one with $22 million in additional revenue in the form of a tax levy, if you're at the average assessed value, your total increase from 24-25 would be $728.66. On the next slide, we have annual increases at the same benchmarks as I previously provided. Okay, so you take your average assessed value on your little postcard that you get every year, try to find, where you fall in, and that would be if the board elected and adopted a budget with the authority of the tax levy incentive aid program. If it was totally approved by the state and adopted it, you're somewhere in the category of, you find your range, and that's your increase for the 25-26 year in comparison to 24-25. On the next few slides, and I'll go through this quick, I make some overall comparisons between the two options that are presented. First is a comparison of our tentative budget versus the proposed tax levy incentive aid program. When it comes to general fund revenue, the difference between the two columns, again, is $23 million. Just for note, I will be fixing the percentage change at the bottom is 14.19%, I believe. That should not be there. Instead, it's relevant to the next slide, which compares the major budget categories. So I believe on that slide, on the major and the expenditures, bottom right-hand corner, that should be 14.19 or 14.19%. I'm going to change it. I'm going to revise it tonight and put the revised presentation on tomorrow. So on that one slide, you won't see that in the revenues. Again, this is the expenditures. The difference amongst the two is $23 million. And one more slide on program costs. With this dollar amount changed, totaling if you were to go with the tax levy incentive aid program, totals $14,731,681 in additional funds for programming. The next few slides adds one more column, and as a result yields comparisons between the 24-25 budget, the 25-26 tentative submission, and the 25-26 budget pending the tax levy incentive aid program. First slide being the comparison of the seven major budget categories, and the following slide compares the program cost details of the three 24-25 tentative budget and a budget with the proposed tax levy incentive aid. Slide 34 is a tax impact comparison on the tentative budget versus the proposed tax levy incentive aid program. As mentioned earlier, the annual increase from 24-25 on the tentative budget submission for the average assessed home was $267.20. The annual increase from 24-25 with the tax levy incentive aid program for the average assessed home was $728.66. So, if you were at the average assessed home value for approximately $461.47, because that is the difference between the two, $728.66 minus $267.20, for approximately $461.47 more annually, you as a taxpayer would be assisting in the funding of our district that includes the prevention of those major eliminations or reductions and the potential, and I'll repeat potential, for those additional expenditures included in our tax levy incentive aid application. Essentially, this slide means what is it entitled? What does $23 million in additional expenditures from the tentative budget submission mean to your household? On the next slide, I mentioned an outlook to the future. We understand that we, in a sense, are being held hostage by the state of New Jersey. We have been provided Band-Aids, and with so many question marks in the air for the future, the board and the district recognize that we need to try to take some matters into our own hands, and that means real hard discussions on the potential consolidation of schools, repurposing of our school buildings, and potential plans for redistricting in the future. It is a major task that as the board prepares for a possible superintendent search, any incoming superintendent candidate needs to be prepared to take on, and there has to be a commitment that needs to be followed through by this board or any future board. The caveat to this all is often these major tasks come with the need to hire professional architects or professional planners, and when you take on a project of this magnitude, like I made mention before, it comes with a price tag. So again, we have a meeting later this week for long-term planning. We got to start the discussion. If that's what this board wants to commit to, that in the future, the only way to really reduce expenditures is to make some really tough decisions, the decision or the conversation has to start now. That being said, at this point, I would like to defer to the board first on any further comment or expand even on that last slide and the totality of the presentation, and then we will open the microphone for public comment. I want to thank you for your time and allowing me the opportunity to serve your community. Thank you, and I'll kick it over to the board or any administrators on the stage to give final or further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rydell, for all of your hours of hard work on this, and we know it wasn't easy making all these zeros and lack thereof work. I'll open it up for the board. Any comments? Okay. At this point, I'm going to ask the public if you would like to speak to come line up, sign up in the white binder, and then share your thoughts with the board. So that at this point, the public portion is open. Anyone? All right. Seeing none, then I will close the public portion. Anything else for tonight? We're going to go into executive session to discuss part of the superintendent search process. So can I have a motion to go into executive session?
Ms. Owen, motion.
And a second, please?
Joe second.
All right. No, we're not going to return. We're going to close from there, or adjourn from there. So I thank the public for your time and for your dedication to listen to all this. As always, read through it, watch it a couple times because it's a lot to process, and email the board on your thoughts because we are voting on this next week. I'd like to wish a happy Mother's Day to all the moms over the weekend, and we will see you next week. Thank you.